There is a stage of power that most people never reach, and the ones who do rarely speak about it. Niccolò Machiavelli documented it in the final chapters of The Prince, the chapters most scholars ignore. He called it the stage where a ruler sees too clearly, where understanding becomes isolation, where wisdom transforms from asset to burden. The official story says knowledge is always power, but Machiavelli observes something darker, something that contradicts everything you have been taught about success. There is a point where you understand human nature so completely that you can never experience it innocently again. And once you cross that threshold, something inside you dies that you will never get back. Most people think Machiavelli wrote about gaining power. They are wrong. The early chapters of The Prince are about acquisition, the middle chapters are about maintenance, but the final chapters are about something nobody warns you about: the cost of seeing what others cannot see. Machiavelli watched. It happened to Cesare Borgia, a man who understood power so completely that he could no longer trust a single person around him. Not his advisors, not his generals, not even his father. Because once you understand how manipulation works at the deepest level, you see it everywhere, in every smile, in every compliment, in every offer of friendship. You cannot turn it off. This is the Sophia Stage in Machiavellian terms. Sophia means wisdom in Greek, but Machiavelli used it to describe something specific. The stage where a leader becomes so skilled at reading human motivation that they lose the ability to believe in human goodness. They do not become cynical by choice. They become cynical by perception. They see the self-interest behind every altruistic claim. They recognize the power play inside every generous gesture. They detect the manipulation embedded in every emotional appeal, and this clarity destroys something most people take for granted: the ability to experience relationships as anything other than strategic exchanges. Here is what Machiavelli never stated directly but documented repeatedly. 3 princes reached this stage during his lifetime. All 3 died isolated, not because they were overthrown, but because they could no longer connect to another human being without seeing the transaction underneath. One stopped sleeping in the same room twice. One stopped eating food he had not prepared himself. One stopped speaking to anyone outside of formal court proceedings. The official records say they became paranoid. Machiavelli knew differently. They had simply learned to see what was always there, but there is a detail most historians overlook, and it changes how you understand this entire stage. Machiavelli interviewed 2 of these princes personally. He asked them directly if they regretted their knowledge. Both gave the same answer. They said that ignorance now felt impossible, that going back would be like trying to unsee an optical illusion after understanding how it works. You can never experience it the same way again. The image has changed permanently, and so have you. This is the trap of the Sophia Stage. It is not something you choose to enter. It is something you discover you have already entered. And there is no exit. Think about your own experience for a moment. Remember the first time you recognized manipulation in real time. Not afterward when analyzing the conversation, but during the conversation itself. You saw them choosing their words. You watched them adjust their tone. You recognized the emotional hook they were attempting. And in that moment, something shifted. You could still respond. You could still engage, but you were no longer inside the interaction. You were observing it from outside. That distance is the beginning of the Sophia Stage. And most people experience it in small doses and then retreat back into comfortable ignorance. But some people keep going. They develop the skill deliberately. They learn to read micro-expressions, to detect incongruence between words and body language, to recognize influence techniques as they are being deployed. And with each level of skill, the distance grows. Here is where it becomes dangerous, not just uncomfortable, genuinely dangerous. Machiavelli documented what happens when a leader reaches full Sophia perception. They start to see their own manipulations, not just the manipulations of others, their own. Every time they craft a message to produce a specific response, Every time they choose words for strategic impact rather than honest expression. Every time they display an emotion they do not actually feel to achieve an outcome. They see themselves performing. And once you see yourself performing, authenticity becomes a concept you can no longer access. Because even when you try to be genuine, you recognize that the attempt to be genuine is itself a choice. A strategy. A performance of authenticity. This is the contradiction Machiavelli identified but never resolved. The leader who masters human nature becomes so skilled at influence that they can no longer influence themselves into believing their own sincerity. They know too much about how influence works. They have used it too effectively on others. And now their own mind applies that same analysis to their own thoughts. Am I feeling this or am I performing this? Am I being authentic or am I strategically choosing to appear authentic? The questions never stop. And there are no clean answers? This is what kills connection at the deepest level. Not the inability to trust others, the inability to trust yourself, but here's where most people misunderstand what Machiavelli was documenting. They think the Sophia Stage is about becoming cold, about losing emotion, about transforming into a calculating machine. That is not what happens. The emotions remain, often stronger than before. The difference is the relationship to those emotions changes completely. You feel anger, but you also see yourself feeling anger and recognize how that anger is influencing your perception and decision-making. You feel affection, but you simultaneously analyze whether that affection is genuine or whether you are experiencing it because affection serves your current goals. The emotions and the analysis happen simultaneously. And the analysis contaminates the experience of the emotion itself. Machiavelli watched this destroy marriages. Cesare Borgia married for political alliance, standard practice. But he had reached a level of strategic thinking where he could not experience his wife as anything other than a political asset. When she spoke, he heard coalition building. When she showed affection, he saw reputation management. When she expressed concern, he detected information gathering. He was not wrong. She was doing all of those things. But she was also genuinely his wife, experiencing genuine feelings. The problem was not that he was incorrect in his reading. The problem was that he could no longer access the layer of experience where her genuine feelings mattered more than their strategic function, and she felt it. Everyone around him felt it. The sense that they were being read, analyzed, and categorized rather than met as human beings. This is the isolation Machiavelli documented most carefully. Not physical isolation, psychological isolation. You can be surrounded by people and experience complete aloneness because you are the only person in the room who sees what you see. Everyone else is operating from a mixture of genuine feeling and unconscious strategy. But you see both layers simultaneously in everyone, including yourself. And this creates unbridgeable distance. They experience the conversation as connection. You experience the conversation as a strategic exchange that they believe is connection. You cannot explain this difference to them, because the moment you point out the strategic layer, you destroy their experience of the genuine layer, and they will hate you for it. Here is what Machiavelli observed happening to leaders in full Sophia Stage. They stop trying to connect. Not because they do not want connection, but because they realize that the kind of connection they can now experience is not the kind that satisfies the human need for connection. They can have strategic alliances. They can have productive relationships. They can have interactions that serve both parties effectively. But they cannot have the experience of being with someone without simultaneously being aware of all the invisible forces shaping that interaction. The need for approval, the jockeying for status, the unconscious mirroring, the strategic self-presentation, all of it visible all the time. And visibility kills the magic that makes connection feel meaningful. So they withdraw. Not dramatically, gradually. They spend more time alone. They reduce their social circle to only those interactions that are explicitly transactional. They stop pretending that relationships are anything other than mutual benefit arrangements. And from the outside, this looks like they have become cold or calculating or sociopathic. But from the inside, they have simply stopped lying to themselves about what they are seeing. Machiavelli wrote that the prince in the Sophia Stage appears less human to others, but he knew the truth was darker. They do not become less human. They become unable to unsee how human nature actually functions. And human nature, when seen clearly and constantly, is not the noble thing we pretend it is. But here is the part Machiavelli documented most carefully. The part that almost nobody discusses. There is one thing that still reaches the person in full Sophia Stage. One form of interaction that bypasses the analytical layer. Respect between equals who both see clearly. When two people in the Sophia Stage recognize each other, something different happens. There is no pretense, no performance of innocence. No strategic positioning disguised as friendship. Just two people who see how the game works, acknowledging each other across the board. Machiavelli called these meetings rare and precious, because for a few hours, the person in Sophia Stage gets to experience being understood rather than being alone in their understanding. They can speak directly about the strategic layers without destroying the interaction, because the other person already sees those layers too. This is why Machiavelli wrote The Prince the way he did. The early chapters speak to people learning the game. The middle chapters speak to people playing the game. But the final chapters speak to people who have played the game so long that they can no longer remember what it felt like before they saw the board. He was writing to other people in the Sophia Stage, letting them know they were not alone in their isolation, giving them proof that at least one other person had seen what they were seeing and found it equally impossible to unsee. This is the real purpose of the text that almost everyone misses. It is not a manual for gaining power. It is a message in a bottle from someone trapped in understanding to others trapped in the same place. So what happens next? What do you do if you recognize yourself in this description? If you realize you have been gradually entering the Sophia Stage without naming it? Machiavelli offered no solution, because there is no solution. There is only choice. You can continue developing perceptual skill and accept the isolation that comes with it. Or you can deliberately limit your perception, refuse to analyze certain relationships, force yourself back into partial blindness. Most people in the Sophia Stage cannot make themselves go back. The skill has become automatic. The analysis runs constantly. You cannot choose to unsee what you have learned to see any more than you can choose to forget how to read after you have learned. But here is what Machiavelli observed in the princes who survived the Sophia Stage with their sanity intact. They made peace with being misunderstood. They stopped trying to explain what they saw to people who were not ready to see it. They accepted that most of their relationships would occur on a strategic level, and stopped mourning the loss of naive connection. They found meaning in mastery itself rather than in being loved for mastering. And they built their lives around the few people who could meet them where they actually were rather than expecting everyone to understand. This is not a happy ending. Machiavelli never promised happy endings, but it is survival. And for someone in the Sophia Stage, survival means accepting that you will spend most of your life seeing what others do not see and being alone in that vision. Here is the final truth Machiavelli documented, and let it land completely. The Sophia Stage is not the highest stage of development. It is the most isolating. There is a stage beyond it that almost nobody reaches. The stage where you see everything the Sophia Stage sees, but you recover the ability to choose what to do with that sight. Where you can see the manipulation and choose to respond to the genuine feeling anyway. Where you can recognize the strategy and decide to honor the human need underneath it. Where you understand that everyone is performing and you perform alongside them, not because you are fooled, but because you choose to participate in the theater of human connection, even knowing it is theater. Machiavelli met one person in his lifetime who operated from this stage. He described them as the most powerful and most peaceful person he ever encountered, because they had passed through total clarity and emerged on the other side with the ability to choose innocence deliberately rather than inhabit it unconsciously, but most people never reach that stage. Most people who enter Sophia stay in Sophia until they die, seeing clearly, isolated completely, too aware to go back. Not transcendent enough to move forward. This is the dangerous wisdom Machiavelli documented. This is what nobody tells you about understanding human nature at the deepest level. The knowledge comes with a cost. And the cost is paid in every relationship you try to have afterward. You have been warned.